Hello and welcome to the Lift Up Journeys podcast. My name is Katie and I am one of the founding members of Lift Up Women in Life Sciences, a community created to connect, champion and inspire women from academia through to C-suite across the life sciences industry. I'm looking forward to sharing with you an inspiring collection of career stories from a group of wonderful women who work in leadership positions across the life sciences industry. I hope by listening to these stories, you will feel inspired in your own career and gain the skills, confidence, and knowledge you need to climb the career ladder and break through the glass ceiling. Welcome back to another episode of the Lift Up Journeys podcast. Today I'm joined by a lovely lady called Brynn Scarborough, and Brynn has a really fantastic background. Brynn currently works as President and CEO of JK Products and Services, who are representing industry-leading brands in the commercial wellness, recovery, and tanning equipment manufacturing space. In the last 12 years, Brynn has held a number of progressive leadership roles until being promoted to the North American CEO in the fall of 2021, advancing the company footprint, go-to-market strategy and product portfolio. Brynn continues to drive the business and industry forward through bold leadership and continual growth. Brynn has been instrumental in removing barriers in the customer journey of JK and works to intentionally support business owners and operators alike. She's committed to investing in and equipping diverse leadership and driving legacy growth through mentorship. Passionate about the intersection of wellness and technology, Brynn has been principally responsible for repositioning JK within the wellness, fitness, and hospitality spaces through strategic product development and portfolio expansion too, successfully breaking into new market verticals and creating a WellTech platform for JK to continue future growth. As a lifelong learner, Brynn continues to pursue both personal and professional development and is currently pursuing her doctorate in business at the University of Tampa, an institution from which she also holds an executive MBA, along with dual undergraduate degrees from a Kansas State University. She's a former fitness instructor, holds her 200-hour registered yoga teacher certification, and is a PADI advanced scuba diver too. But in her free time, Brynn enjoys fitness, travel, and also spending time with her dog, Dharma, which is wonderful. That's a fantastic introduction, Brynn. It must be quite an experience hearing that all back for you.
It's quite a mouthful. I'm wondering who this girl is and what she does in her spare time.
Well, thank you for giving us
Yeah, thank you
Thank
so
you for
much for
giving us
the
the chance to
introduction.
share it, Brynn. We're really looking forward to delving a little bit more into your career journey today. One sector I really wanted to kickstart our conversation on today is your true passion for well tech and wellness. Where did that come from?
That's a really interesting question because as I think about where my heart really started to get involved in wellness and fitness and even kind of this personal journey for me, it really goes back to freshman or sophomore year of college. I had started having some personal health issues and, I have quite a rebellious heart, as if you can't tell from that bio. And I had a doctor tell me, certain things about my health at a very young age, 19, 20 years old, we're just going to be that way forever, right? Whether it was chronic fatigue or weight gain or bad skin and a lot of hormonal issues, that type of thing. And so I really took it upon myself after hearing that news. I didn't know much about health and fitness. A lot of times coming into college, you don't need to know much because you have been at a certain weight or you've lived a certain lifestyle, whatever you learned growing up. And so at that point, it was really quite pivotal for me. I needed to be told that I couldn't do something, which has worked for me many times throughout my life. And then B, I really needed to take it upon myself to learn and to prove that wrong. And so that's really where the journey started. I was able to lose about 40 pounds, really learned about nutrition. That led me to want to, as a lifelong learner, get the certifications, start teaching in that space, kind of learn all that I could. Which fast forward almost 20 years later, here I am kind of still in that intersection of wellness and technology and
Wow,
well-being
that's
and
amazing to hear that
fitness.
that's as early as when your passion for this sector kind of started to arise, and because it happened to you personally as well, right? I think that's what's really important to share. But what were you studying when you were at college? What were you originally there to do?
A few different things. So my path pivoted a couple of times. I originally was studying international business and relations, so political science, as well as philosophy. So I thought I was going to law school at a young age. And as it turns out, I have quite a knack for leading people and growing businesses. But I would love to tell you that it was a well thought out, strategically crafted plan. And sometimes I think we, especially as women, we kind of have this idea that if we weren't set up for this specific career from the very beginning, that, the doors are closed to us. But honestly, my path has been one of pivots and repositioning and taking opportunities that were in front of me and growing them for everything they're worth. So at that time, no, what I'm doing today really wasn't in the scope of what I had planned. But went to work right after college, selling and leading retail spaces and began leading teams very early on. And then, landed where I am with JK almost 12 years ago
Wow,
as their
it's a
development
great
director.
journey to hear it, and as you said, I think women are so great at saying this was all thought out, this was planned, this is exactly where I want to be, but actually being okay with change is important. So tell us a little bit more about that first job out of college. So you were selling in retail, I believe, and tell us what that entailed for you.
Yeah. Oh, first job. Well, my first job. So my backstory is really unconventional. So I definitely want to put that out there early on because it's a story that I wouldn't have told 10 years ago. I would have been too concerned about, being the odd duck in the room or being the one that's unlike everybody else. Whereas today, it's one of my most important passions to make space for people whose pedigree doesn't look like everyone else's and whose backstory doesn't look the same. So I actually got my GED at 16. I was homeschooled from a very early age. And so I went to work full time before I ever went to college to be able to save to go to university. And so I really kind of came in with a lot of work experience. That's something that really follows me to this day is that I've always been surrounded by people who were older than me. I've always been surrounded by, people who didn't look like me in a work environment, things like that. And that skill set has continued to serve me well. But right out of college, I was directly into full-time retail. I actually went to work at my very favorite store at the time, which was Ann Taylor Loft. I think I still have pieces in my closet from that store. And I ended up being the lead salesperson in the district in our tiny little store in my university town, and ended up as an assistant manager there as well before I moved on to another sales management role before landing at JK. So it really all was about creating relationships and meeting people's needs, meeting people where they were, making them feel good about themselves, and helping them understand a little bit more about how to put lives and wardrobes and
Yeah,
even
I
home
was going to
spaces
ask you
together.
actually, what was it about a sales role that felt like a good fit for you? Because I feel sometimes you can fall into a sales role, but what was it about the day-to-day responsibilities that just felt a good fit for you?
You know, First of all, I'm a little competitive. No big surprise, but I'm really good at humanizing and creating relationships around a selling process. And so, really coming into a consultative role, which I've done since very early on, whether that's consulting you about the new suit you were going to wear to an interview or how you were redesigning your home, an interior design, really coming in to say, okay, I'm someone who's going to give you a trusted opinion. I'm going to tell you what you want to hear. I'm going to tell you what you don't want to hear. And you're going to know that both of those will come from me as well. And honestly, that's where we guide our team today. We sell capital investment equipment into the wellness and technology business space. And so, those are large investments, and we really try to come alongside our operators as partners and consultants, more so than just the heavy sell. because we're there for the long-term relationship. We're there to be able to grow
Yeah, that's
relationships
really
over time.
interesting that you see things in that manner, because it clearly has pulled on your key strengths of who you are as a person. And I think that's always really important to highlight in anyone's career journey, is that you've clearly taken on each role because it's been a core strength of yours. And obviously this first position you had in the working world, you obviously went into a bit of a leadership role as well for them, didn't you? What did you enjoy about leadership
Mhm.
so early on?
Well, early on, I enjoyed just telling people what
Yeah.
to do. I'll be honest with you. I can't say I take a lot of my own personal lessons from being a young,
Yeah.
insecure leader, right? I'm probably harder on myself than I should be. So what did I enjoy? I enjoyed having the responsibility. I enjoyed looking at the numbers and knowing that I owned that, or that I owned that shift, or I owned that space. I was doing a lot more than delegating at the time. I was doing a lot more than teaching at the time. And certainly I look back on that space and see the kind of insecure, maybe passive aggressive leadership style that I had at 21, 22, that I have gotten to grow past today. But definitely it was being able to take ownership, be able to take responsibility, and really feel like I could accomplish, what was in front of me with hard work and dedication to that. Um, and then leave some of the lessons behind. I feel sorry for some of my former employees, some of which I'm still friends with, but others I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. I could have done that conversation or had that hard talk so much better with the skill set that I have today. But we all
Totally.
have to
And
go
it's
through that
always
journey.
learnings, isn't it? It's always trying to learn from a particular situation and saying, hey, I didn't like the way I handled that, so in the future I will handle it this way. That's all part of leadership lessons, I think. And that kind of brings me on to the next step you made in your career. So you moved from here to joining JK, didn't you? What was the role you took on
Mhm.
initially within the JK group?
So when I joined JK, I actually joined as business development director. And I was brought on specifically to do a couple of things. At that time, our company was primarily and only a sun tanning company, and we had been for years. And so I was specifically brought on as an outside voice, as someone who had experience beyond the industry that we were in at that time. I was working on projects that were completely beyond core market, so skincare at the time and some other types of applications. Very difficult at the time, right? We were not set up for that. We were not ready for it at the time, but the lessons that I learned on those projects still serve me today. And I also was brought in to be a speaker and spokesperson for a lot of our trainings and conferences and that type of thing. I have a very nerdy background in debate. I was a homeschooled debate kid. That's the only sport I've ever gotten hardware in. I can look at the trophies right up here on top of my bookshelf. I'm still very proud of them. So yeah, I've always had a knack for public speaking. I've always had a knack for being able to think on my feet, train, educate, relate. Um, Kids out there, if there's one nerdy thing you invest in, go to debate team. It will serve you well. I thought it was so lame. And in reality, as an almost 40-year-old woman, I tell everyone, put your kids in debate. It's the best thing you can do. Um, but yeah, it really came in as that outsider perspective, which had major pros and cons, big obstacles in front of the opinions that I was sharing and the work that I was doing. And then, fast forward 12 years later, and we've repositioned the entire company, and kind of repositioned and remade ourselves in a completely new way. So little did I know at that time what was ahead of me.
Wow.
But yeah,
And
that's
you've
where it
obviously been with the
started.
JK group for over 12 years now, haven't you? And obviously progressed hugely in the time that you've been there. What's that journey looked like for you in terms of moving from each new position and each new promotion?
Yeah, I'm trying to learn to be more present. It's something I'm working on a little bit later in my career, right? Focus less on the next step all the time and more on being here in the moment. But as a young career human, boy, I was always focused on it. Sometimes a 24, 36-month plan, right? And I can work it backwards to a checklist of, day to day what needs to be accomplished. That's what my growth plan in JK looked like as well. So For around the first 2 years, I was development director. Then I moved on to director of marketing, which was a brand new space for me, but one that has really taught me a lot, because at this point I've had touchstones in pretty much all areas of our customer journey now for the company that I get to lead. And it gives me a level of insight that, we don't do things the way I always did it, but I've got experience with in the departments with leaders that I'm working with today. So after marketing, I had really started developing relationships and helping guide key account sales, key relationships in our national business, especially as we were just beginning to transition some pieces of the business very early on. And so after that, it promoted to executive director of sales. And that was a big step, because that meant that a lot of these key account relationships were primarily owned by me at that point, and really represented a kind of a big turning point in my level of responsibility and influence in the company as well. At that point, we were acquisitioned in 2017. And so we really did a lot of work post acquisition to not only professionalize, but almost remake the company in some important ways to set us up for growth in the future. And so in 2018, I became managing director and became in control of the total business segment in the US. And then my title changed to CEO, but my role didn't change. I've been in that role since 2018. But was happy to receive the CEO role about almost 2.5 years ago now. So it's been quick, right? About 2.5 years at a time, moving through progressive roles, and being able to really see
Did you
growth
always have a
in that
clear
way.
vision that you wanted to become the CEO of the group, or was it simply something that came 2 years and then another 2 years, or did you envision yourself always doing that?
That's a good question. I coach people, especially women, that there's not a path charted for us, right? We don't have that hero's journey in a lot of spaces to be able to look at other people like us to say, I'm going to do that. I'm going to follow that type of progression or that type of path. So no, I would say early on, I had no idea that path could exist. I didn't know when I became development director or marketing director, or any of those things, that the path to CEO even could materialize. It probably wasn't till about 2018 that started coming into view for me. And once it came into view, I was like a dog with a bone. I certainly became very committed to that. Now, I will tell you, the title of CEO was a lifelong goal for me. Accomplishing it felt very different than what I expected. But at the end of the day, that was something, earning that title was something that was important to me. I've since learned a lot about the significance or insignificance of titles compared to whether or not you're fulfilled every day. But no, I can't say, I wasn't born thinking I was going to be a CEO. I didn't go to college thinking that. I didn't start this role thinking that. But really just trusting where I put my foot down next, and always having my eye on the horizon as things materialized and became
That's
possible.
actually really brilliant advice to take on as well, is that I don't always think we have to have this clear pathway of where we're going to progress, because your interests can also change along the way. And as you said, I think it's important to
Yeah.
always think about feeling fulfilled in your role, irrelevant of what that entails. And like you said, with your move from business development to marketing, it was a different view. It was working with customers in a different way, but it has set you up for success where you are now. And hopefully you enjoy the role that you do now. Hopefully it's something that fulfills you. So it's a big
Yeah.
learning, isn't it, as you go along?
Yeah. And, I think we get stuck in this outdated idea that A, there's a plan, there's a master plan, and you should have one. And B, that if you don't have one, something's wrong. Because you're right. We are so many different iterations. I'm a different human than I was at 22 or 23. I will continue to be different iterations of myself in the future that I am able to make space for. And, expanding your skill set helps with that. But I think especially for women, we get stuck in this idea that if we can't see all the way to the end goal, then we must not have a plan. Maybe our purpose is off track, and you hear it too in the recruiting world, and I hear it as well, that this idea of like the long-term company person or the super specified skill set is going away, right? Average tenure for an executive now, I think, is down to
Yeah.
what, 4.3 years, whereas in the past it was decades, right? Or you just never left, right? The CEO had been with the company for 35 years, whereas now that's not the case. And so we're still carrying this baggage of a really outdated mindset about what career development really looks like, when in reality, we can pivot and we can take on new roles and learn new skill sets. And honestly, if you're not, you're going to get left
Totally.
behind in a
Yeah,
lot of those
totally.
ways.
One of the analogies that always
Yeah.
springs to my mind when we talk about career development is that your career should feel a little bit like a jungle gym. There should be lots of different areas that you can go into, because learning lots of
Yeah.
different things will help you in the long run. It might feel like a lateral step because maybe the title's the same or the leveling is the same, but it gives you something else to learn and something else for you to take on board into your next role. So I love the analogy jungle gym. I love, as you said, that career development, it's not straightforward. Average tenure is down significantly because our working world has changed, particularly
Mhm.
since the COVID pandemic that we all went through on a global scale. The working world has changed and you have to adapt. Otherwise, like you said, you're going to get left behind.
Yeah, absolutely. We just had a big conversation last week at a fitness conference I attended
Yeah.
about change intelligence. And in the past, the recipe for success was EQ plus
Yeah.
IQ equals success, right? All you needed was, some intelligence and emotional intelligence. Well, now that includes change intelligence, and we're still defining what exactly change intelligence means. But we all know, after living through the last 4 years, that if you can't adapt not only your career but your business, if you can't pivot, if you can't lead in crisis, if you can't, these are essential skill sets that are now also being heavily recruited. And at the end of the day, those are not skill sets that are defined because you've been in the same place for 35 years or the same role or the same industry or business segment. So I really am an advocate of not pigeonholing yourself to think that what you're doing now
Yeah.
is what you have to do forever. But also, dabbling and experimenting and exploring even later on in your career, because it leaves you in a space where you can have a conversation, you can carry on a narrative. And yes, there are certain skill sets that you will need, right? You'll need to be able to manage a P&L. You'll need to be able to pivot through change. But those things are universal among different business segments, right? It's not so specified anymore. So it really is changing the conversation around how we view executive development, and we're lagging, right? We're trying to catch up to what's really happening in the real world, because that's what's happening
Yeah,
in the real
the
world
real
on a
world
daily
changes
basis.
every day, doesn't it? And change intelligence is becoming more crucial for anyone, no matter what leadership position you work in, whether you're board level, whether you sit in a C
Yeah.
suite, or whether you're in a people leadership position within a large business or a large structure, or whether you manage a small team. I think change intelligence now is something that's going to be recognized as a criteria for somebody in a job role moving forwards.
Mhm.
I read an article recently, Brynn, actually, which talked about how women are so good at change intelligence. What's your opinion? What have you learned about why women seem to be quite highly skilled in change intelligence?
Yeah, over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, we all feel like we've gotten a career's worth of experience condensed into a very short time period. But looking back at my leadership team, which is a highly diverse team filled with fantastic female leaders, and how we adapted to and how we really came together during COVID and new market segments, you name it, right? Over the past couple of years, I feel like what women really do differently, or what we really bring to the table as a skill set, is this combination of intuition and logic, because most of what we were doing and most of what we were leading through was not predictable, was not forecastable. There was no spreadsheet that was going to tell us that future decisions could be based on historical performance, right? That all went out the window. So we really had to sit down and not only, in some ways, trust our gut, protect our people, do what was best for our customers and people around us, but then also lead by consensus, right? And lead in a way that leadership teams could lock arms in a very democratic way, to be able to create that front line, instead of just having, an authoritarian decision making space. And not that that's what men do, I'm not stereotyping in that way, but women are really good at coming together, forming consensus, leading with a mix of intuition and logic. And honestly, when all of our crystal balls are very cloudy at this point, sometimes you just got to be willing to go with your gut
Yeah.
and be wrong. I've been wrong more in the last 4 years than I've been in my entire career. And I've had to get really comfortable with that, right? And take the ego and the pride out of that and just learn as quickly as possible. And I think women are really, really well equipped to do that, right? They're very well equipped to pivot between roles and to be able to move from one hat to the other seamlessly, and their minds stay open to growth, their minds stay open to change,
Yeah,
which I
I,
think is
I totally
integral.
agree. And I love the fact that you talk about your diverse team, because I think that teams that are successful are definitely those that are the most diverse. And I'm talking diversity of thought as well. I'm also thinking that there are
Yeah.
obviously some amazing skill sets that women possess, like change intelligence, and there are some skill sets that typically men would possess more than women. Maybe that's a risk-taking skill set or confidence within a certain setting. So tell me a little bit more for you now as a leader, Bryn. How would you ensure that you have diversity within your team?
I have had the privilege, which is one of the most exciting things I feel like I've done in my career, of building a leadership team in multiple layers more than one time. And it is one of my greatest honors, honestly, to be able to hold the door open, and create a space for not only leadership diversity, but thought diversity as well, like you said. And so I do that in a few ways, right? I look at the individuals who should be set up to stack the deck for a specific role. And then I look at the scrappy human that I consider myself to be, that maybe isn't the perfect pedigree, but has gotten it done, has been able to figure out a way to be resourceful. That could be male or female. Gender doesn't really matter in that situation. And I really try to keep a solid mix between hiring for skill set and hiring for scrap. And my team is very mixed in that way. And so, the ones that come in with a very specified skill set learn grit and learn scrappiness from the rest of the team, and vice versa, right? The skill sets are improved, from the ones that maybe have got 15 years or 20 years of experience, but not a traditional background, things like that. So then it really becomes about the churning of collaboration, and really empowering my team to feel safe to take risks. I would honestly, I would combat the idea that women are less risk averse or more risk averse. I would say that in a psychologically safe environment, women will go hard at it and are willing to take risks, but they take risks in community. They take risks when they know the group has come together, right? They're less likely just to jump out on a limb and say, well, whatever. But yeah, I've really enjoyed watching, my diverse team kind of take ownership and learn from each other, because that's really the point of that
Yeah,
symbiotic
totally. And
relationship
and that's
now.
actually great insights to hear from you, Bryn, is to really incorporate the diversity into your team, how you do that, how you create that collaborative culture as well, because I think that that is what can really create a successful team, that collaboration element and everyone sort of working towards the same thing. Curious to maybe touch a little bit on some of your personal achievements as well, Bryn, because you've got a lot. So your journey into wellness and well tech obviously started when, as you said, you were at college, you had some personal news that you then put yourself on a bit of a journey of learning. Tell us more about what else you've achieved in the wellness world outside of working.
I would say outside of working, I would say a lot of it has to do with academia for me. Coming from a homeschooled background, I wasn't supposed to do any of this, quite frankly, right? This is not the life that I was set up to live. So again, my rebel heart, sometimes those situations
Yeah.
really serve me well, and really the walking into an underestimated space, right? If your ego can handle it, is a highly strategic place to be. One that I've taken up a lot in my world. So honestly, some of the things that I'm most proud of outside of business are not only I went back and got my executive MBA at 30. I was one of the youngest people in the class to do that, but being able to really observe myself with my peers was a life-changing experience for me, especially with my non-traditional educational background. I was never with my peers. So I was always, outside the space of, I hate to say it, but knowing where I measured up. That matters less today. But there were times where I needed to know that. So, I thought when I got accepted to this program, someone was going to come in and say, "Oh my gosh, we made a mistake. You have to leave. Like, you don't actually deserve to be here." When in reality, being able to sit in a room with people who at the time I aspired to be like and see how I measured up, it honestly changed my professional development path. And then now coming back, it's incredible. 8 years later, coming back and starting my doctoral program, it's incredible to see the journey of development, to walk in and say, I'm not feeling like someone's going to pull me out of the class because there was a mistake anymore. I'm excited to share my experience and share my journey and, the expertise that I've gained out over time. Outside of that, the most important thing, in my opinion, that I do beyond the business is making space for other women. Whether that is personal coaching, professional coaching, whether that is in community and being an advocate. It really is I really do try to be the resource that I didn't feel like I had, and be the mentor that I didn't feel like I had. Finding mentorship as you rise honestly just becomes a vacuum. And I think that's part of the work you guys are doing with Lift Up, is to try and fill that vacuum. And so I think we as women, and even I for a long time, thought, gosh, I'm not ready to be a mentor, until I thought it's either me or there's not mentors. And that's part of the problem, right? We've got to mentor whether we feel like we're ready or not. We've got to get rid of this idea that somehow we're not qualified. You're qualified. If you're a female in mid-career, you're qualified to mentor. It's as simple as that. And really pursuing that and creating a platform for it. So outside of work, what's left? Those are some of the spaces that get me the most excited. That and just personal health and fitness, longevity. All of those areas.
That's
are really
amazing. And I love that you actually touched on mentorship, because we all know how difficult it is to find a mentor in our industry. In general, it's really tough. And as you said, the more senior you become in your career, the harder that does become. I know that there are so many women out there who really want to start their career in mentoring. They want to start giving back a little bit. And as you said, it could be as early as mid-career. You could be relatively early in your career and supporting someone who maybe is straight out of academia. They're in their first role. They maybe need a little bit of support. So I love that you touched on the fact that we can start mid-career. For you now, as an experienced mentor now, what advice do you give to someone who maybe is relatively young in their career, maybe relatively junior, maybe they're a woman, so they could be one of the only women in their team or one of the only women in their business? Would you have particular advice?
Mm-hmm. I think the particular advice is different than how we show up for a woman in that space, because I think about what would have been dynamic for me as a young leader and what I've seen be, the game-changing experience for women that I've led. It's not so much do this one thing or be this one thing. It's more about being that one voice of confidence, being that one voice of not just reassurance, but the human that's there to see what that individual may not see in themselves yet. The person that's there to mirror the potential, because it's not being mirrored anywhere else. It's not being mirrored by a sponsor, an advocate, a boss. And it's incredible what one mirror can do. It's not so much the specific advice, right? That changes for each individual. It changes for every person who's being mentored or coached. But someone reflecting back my own potential to me changed my life, right? And I really do, and it was rare, right? And I think when we can be that for other women, and that's also the thing, that takes the skill set out of it, That takes the hierarchy out of it. That takes the need to be at a certain place in your career. Because really, any woman can do that for another woman, is just reflect her potential back to her. Um, that's what
Yeah.
changes the conversation, because you need someone else to see what you may not
Yeah.
be able to
And I think a
see
lot of that
yet.
can be contributed to imposter syndrome. We talk a lot about that, and I think it's great we're finally mentioning that imposter syndrome is what happens for a lot of women, particularly if you're the only person in a meeting room or the only person in a team. You can, even as you said, at various points in your career, you thought, I'm not qualified to be here, I'm too junior to be here, but actually saying, okay, I'm recognizing this. This is something that I'm struggling with, but I do deserve to be here. And supporting other women. I love the phrase showing up for other women. I think that's a great way. And I feel like all we want to do is to support each other, right?
That's right. Well, women over time, I hate to say, and I do think the narrative is changing, and you and me, and we're all an active part of that. We had a bad rap for eating our young. And I have been the recipient of that type of energy. I know many other women who have been the recipient of that type of energy. And at the end of the day, changing that environment or changing that paradigm really comes down to our own security, and how we show up and how we feel about ourselves internally. And I think everybody thinks they have the worst imposter syndrome. Everybody thinks they're the only ones with imposter syndrome, right? We don't talk about it. When in reality, right, if you meet someone who's never had imposter syndrome, they could be a narcissist. They could be someone with a little bit of a lack of self-awareness. And today, my opinion of imposter syndrome has changed, because I think, gosh, I want to be pushing up into that space where I'm like, oh God, I don't know if I can do it. And I figure it out. And I constantly want to be pushing that edge, that upward edge of where I feel like my ability and my potential is. Because as I've pushed that over time, instead of backing away from that, diving headfirst into that, using fear as an indicator instead of a caution sign to run away from, right? Leaning into that space of discomfort, right, has really changed the environment. But it took me earning my own respect in that way to lean in a couple of times. And, I don't mean in the old school way. I mean, like, when you feel that indicator light come on and you're like, I don't know if I can do this,
Yeah.
figure it out, right? Do your best, put something on the board, right? Put something into that blank space and take responsibility. Because at the end of the day, leadership is taking responsibility. It's
Yeah,
not having it
totally.
all
You
figured
only
out.
figure things out as you go along, don't you? Each new learning, each new situation, like you said, don't be afraid of being wrong, of not getting things right the first time, because that's where growth happens, right? That's where you start to feel uncomfortable, but you know
Yeah.
that everything that you do is kind of setting you up for the next piece of success. And one thing related to this that I really wanted to cover with you, Bryn, is I think you're brilliant at obviously mentoring, giving back. It's clearly one of the top areas that you really are focused on. I know you go to a lot of face-to-face events as well, not just also for your work, but also for networking events as well. I'd love to hear from you what you enjoy about the face-to-face events and like what benefits you have from them.
Whew. I'm honestly mixed on it. I am not a natural extrovert. I don't gain my energy from other people. And so for me to find my own way in the networking space, I've really had to reimagine it. I'm not a human who wants to show up in a room of 200 people I don't know and
Yeah,
start handing out business cards. But I do thrive in an intentional space. And I've had to learn that it's fine if that first version doesn't work for me. Um, but I've also, had to learn that nothing evolves, as we know, without intentional efforts. So finding groups like Lift Up where I can intentionally connect and have real conversations as opposed to, a networking cocktail hour, finding groups like YPO or fitness executive leadership, things like that, where we really become a more actionable network. And that's what I think women are missing, honestly, is that you can go to all these networking events, but if I can't call you and make an ask, if I'm not comfortable enough, and vice versa of me as well, if I'm not comfortable enough after a couple of those events to feel like I've got resources and that I can be a resource, I don't feel like it's worthwhile, right? And I think that's something that Lift Up is really serving, and then something that I really try to take into consideration as I'm spending my time networking is, am I being vulnerable enough to really create clear and positive connections, not just telling more people about what I do, and B, am I facilitating spaces where am I being an intentional connector to be able to help other people, make the ask. And I put it out there on social media all the time. And I really do believe this, is that to take the ick out of the ask,
Yeah.
because women won't ask. We won't ask for what we need. I won't ask for that recommendation. I won't ask for that referral, for that review, you name it. Like, and I try to just say, like, ask me for anything. If I'm in your network, assume the answer is yes, and come to me later and tell me what you need from me, right? I will be that resource, because we have all needed that resource over time, knowing that our contacts are in the thousands, and yet we don't feel like any
Yeah.
of them are actually actionable. And so for me, that's how I've started making sense of it. I have to be very intentional with it. I have to be intentional with my time. But also, I can say after about 2 years or so of real effort, that network of people that I feel like see me, support me, know what I'm about, and vice versa, has grown and is continuing to grow exponentially. So, one bit of advice to my younger self: invest in that space earlier. And even of the dirty word of personal brand development, I'm old school in that way. Personal brand is like,
Yeah.
ugh,
Yeah.
self
Yeah.
promotion, ugh. And someone explained it to me the other day. They said, your personal brand is the legacy that lives beyond you and the company. And I thought, boy, that's
Yeah.
something that I can get behind. Beyond just saying, like, what's your influencer voice, and how many likes and follows and I really struggle in
Yeah.
that space. I'll be honest with you, but saying, okay, what am I known for beyond my current role at JK? What am I known for about how I show up in my career? Is that wellness? Is that mentorship? Is that, creating space for other leaders? I can get behind
Yeah.
sharing that narrative. And that's really kind of changed my idea of
Totally.
personal
And it's
branding
putting
as
the
well.
personal into the branding, isn't it? It's knowing what you want to share,
Yeah.
being intentional with your brand and taking it in the direction that you really want to be in. And sometimes we can lose sight of that. Like you said, sometimes there's a focus on how many subscribers do I have? How many followers do I have? And I think we always have to remember that the personal brand works when it's personal, and it will long live outside of your current role. It will long live your current organization, and it will
Yeah.
also allow you to give back to others by being a voice for other women. They can look
Yeah.
at your brand and say, I love this topic that Brynn discussed. I also want to share my thoughts on it. And it's that personal brand that I think brings us all together as a community.
I agree with you. And I think so many times women feel this inherent urge to be
Yeah.
overly compartmentalized. I know that I do. I know that I've really struggled with, how real am I really going to be in this space? What will I be judged for? Is the busy working mom going to be judged for being too busy? Or is, the single executive going to be judged for not having a part?
Yeah.
The list is endless. And I think what we're learning about long-term career happiness, but also leadership resilience and longevity, is that those compartmentalizations have to come down,
Yeah.
those silos have to come down, to be able to create alignment. And so I have to challenge myself, right? It's an ongoing point of learning to say, show up in a real way, show up authentically with what feels right to you, and be
Absolutely.
known in that way.
Totally. But
It's
it's
a
being your
challenge.
authentic self, isn't it? And it's figuring that out. That doesn't come easy, but
Yeah.
it's figuring it out in time and really being able to continue to share you and who you are personally, authentically, that I think really, really stands you in good stead. Your career story is fascinating, Bryn. Thank you for sharing it with us. I wanted to be able to finish our episode today with just a little bit of advice from you. So you touched about obviously things you tell your younger self, but is there anything in particular that you would share in relation to how you balance your personal and your professional goals? Because I think you're a great example of someone who is balancing both what they want to achieve personally, but also professionally. What advice would you give to someone who's looking for a little bit of balance here?
Gosh, I think giving yourself some grace, that balance the way we have imagined it is a myth. The way we have imagined that our days will be perfectly time blocked and I'll spend an hour here and an hour here. This is not real, right? And I saw something recently, I've seen it all over social media that says, in our minds, showing up 100% means showing up with 100% every single day. And in reality, showing up with 100% means 20% one day, 110% the next day, 40% the next day, and understanding that we're going to kind of wax and wane through this journey. So, yesterday is a good example. At the end of the day, I kind of judge a good day by, did I make investments or did I make deposits into all of the buckets that matter to me? Like that bucket is obviously career and my role at JK. That bucket is, my doctoral endeavors. That's also my personal health, my fitness, my well-being. At the end of the day, I feel like I've had a fulfilling day when I say, regardless of to the extent, but did I, make the next vote, as James Clear would say, for the better person in those areas. And if I can say yes to that, then I've had a fulfilling day, right? I'm happy about that day. But the idea that it's always going to be perfect, I think is not realistic. The other thing that's really been impactful for me recently is just accepting this really natural fact of seasonality. Whereas as a younger human, I could go 100% all out all the time to a cycle of burnout and then another cycle of burnout. And I have learned as a more seasoned professional and human that I need to let myself go through seasons. I need to let myself go through, seasons of cocooning or deep work or extroversion and, feeling the energy of new things and not expect my energy and my output to be the same every day at all times. It's not how we work in nature. It's not how we work in business. And yet somehow we think that if we're not at 175% every day,
Yeah.
we're failing. And that's honestly been a real game changer
Yeah,
for me in the last
absolutely.
couple of
And I think
years.
to your point, I don't think the terminology work-life balance should be used anymore because we all know that there's no 50-50 balance between the two. There's some days where you work more, there's other days where you're completely burnt out and you have to go and take care of yourself first and foremost, whether it's taking the dog out for a walk or having a little bit of extra sleep or dedicating to some personal time. I think that the balance doesn't really
Yeah.
exist in our working world anymore, does it? So I think it's important to understand, like you said, each day contribute something towards each area each day. And that's something you can sort of walk away from end of the day and say, I did a good job.
Yeah, exactly. And to the extent that it's under your control, removing things that create negative stress, this idea that work-life balance is stress-free, also not real. Like positive stress, we are built for challenge. We are built to create resilience through challenge, right? And to create learning through challenge. And so focusing on the things that bring you positive stress and positive learnings, even if in the moment, I have moments of overwhelm, there's no doubt, but then I ask myself, okay, am I overwhelmed with, negativity? Is this bringing me down? Am I feeling burnt out? Or am I overwhelmed with, do I feel excitement? Like, what's my energy in this space? How does it make me feel? And so then just really focusing on, what's the most important thing in front of me. The only other thing I want to make sure I say if we're talking about advice, especially to our younger selves, is stop worrying so much about
Yeah.
what other people think. As a 22-year-old, I wish someone had just reminded me of that
Yeah.
about 45 times a day and continued all the way through my early 30s because no one else is as concerned about what you're doing as you are. Um, and we're doing this one time, right? I have really, really found a lot of peace and enjoyment out of creating alignment. I think balance and alignment are two totally different things. I think when you're in alignment, you can really create a lot of movement and a lot of momentum and a lot of excitement and a lot of positive stress because one area feeds another area, feeds another area. This podcast that I'm doing with you is personally fulfilling and it's professionally fulfilling, right? It crosses boundaries to make that happen. So looking for those areas, but honestly, stop caring what anybody else has to say about what you do. Because Because at the end of the day, like, it's only you. 10 years later, all those people you're worried
Totally.
about today will be gone.
Yeah.
They won't be in your life. 2 years later, most of them will be gone. 6 months from now, you're probably not
Yeah.
going to be talking to a few of them. So making decisions, on that barometer, and I feel like women get really touchy in that space. I do. I still struggle with it. Man, shake it off. Take that backpack
Yeah.
off and run in the direction
Absolutely.
that
And
makes you
fly the flag
happy.
for your own success as well, right? Be your own supporter more than anyone else, and know that you have to follow your instincts, follow where you want to be courageous. And she said, don't worry about everybody else because they won't always be around for long. Yeah,
That's right. That's right. Because everybody else is worried about
very
everybody
true.
else. They don't have
Very
time
true.
to worry
Well,
about
that's
you.
a really wonderful note
They
for us
really
to
don't.
finish on today, Bryn. So thank you so much for sharing your advice. It's been really wonderful to hear how your own career journey evolved, but also all the work that you're now doing to support other women and just other people in our industry in general. So thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to work with you today, and we look forward to continuing to support you along the way as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Katie. And thank you to Lift Up for everything that you guys are doing in this space. It's really been a joy to be a part
That's
of.
great to
And
hear. Thank
thank you
you
for having
again for
me.
your time, Bryn. It's been a real pleasure.